Hello, everybody. We have a panel, and we have a great speaker today, Andrew, who is the CEO in Skillz. And frankly, I don't know much about the company, and we are Autotech investors, but we are exchanging some war stories about my exposure to gaming about 15 to 17 years ago. And so I was part of the firm, J.P. Fisher-Jurvetson. They're still around, although they're changing name. They're becoming Threshold Ventures. And during those days, we invested in Xfire and Massive and did a bunch of other gaming deals. But it was a long, long time ago. And so I'm here to be completely refreshed and amazed and hopefully mesmerized by the marketplace you guys are running, specifically in gaming development space. So can you tell me about what Skillz do and dynamics and business model?
Sure thing, Alexei. I'm excited. So let's see, last 17 years in gaming, we've gone from a few 100 million computers to 4 billion mobile devices. Where Skillz plays, we power esports on mobile phones. And that may sound completely insane. Maybe I'll back up and explain esports for a second, but that's people playing, competing, and earning a living from playing video games in front of audiences or even at home in front of virtual audiences. So Skillz is the largest mobile esports company you've never heard of. That was a headline once in TechCrunch. I always laugh about it. To kind of give you an idea of our scale, we power about 15,000 game companies that deliver experiences to around 20 million American consumers right now. We run about $1,800 a minute in payment transactions, and we do that in $2 to $3 increments. So we're a quite prolific mobile payment company in that sense. My background, I'm a serial entrepreneur, inventor, started out in private equity and venture capital back long ago, actually almost 13 years ago. And I founded, most recently before this, founded a company called IsleBuyer that became Intuit Go Payment. We were one of the 3 largest mobile payment companies competing against a company you may know well called Square. I was a director at Intuit before this, and I left there to join Skillz. Skillz is 6 years old now. We're a little over 220 employees right here in Market in 6th. I wince when I say that.
And so when we talk about marketplace, we just had a long conversation by different venture capitalists. And this morning there was even an argument. If you look at Lime and Bird is in the marketplace, or it's really one big supplier, and it's a bricks and mortar business. You have your scooters and you sell it to or rent it to people looking for micromobility. And so your business model, are you a real marketplace or you are just payment platform provider? And so how does it work? Why do you think it's a marketplace versus just sticky business with good network effects?
Fair enough. So, I don't know if you call it a marketplace or a platform business, but we power game studios. We are a B2B in that sense. And then the next piece is the B2C. So we actually are the end-facing consumer social network that people sign into. We actually control the identity credential for the consumer, the payment wallet for the consumer. They register into Skillz, and then they reuse that credential everywhere they log into. So probably about as much of a marketplace as, say, Facebook Connect. And when we kind of think about how we engage with the different constituents in the B to B to C piece, we're actually starting to work on, and I was thinking about this before we came up here, the 2V piece. And what is the 2V? Well, we're working a lot on the viewing aspects of the people who are playing on the network. So it really is becoming a complicated chain of value. But I would argue probably as much as other companies like eBay, we're a marketplace.
Okay, thank you. So how do you bring developers on your platform first? And so you're essentially a platform between people who are seeking entertainment. So think about Netflix. I'm a user. I want to be entertained. And content providers. And people in your case, folks building computer games. And so how do you track who is the right player, who is the wrong player? How do you build trust in your transactional ecosystem. Help us understand supply-demand equilibrium. Where did it start? What was the kind of excessive and what was in shortage when you started the business?
Okay, so I'd love to give you guys my playbook. My playbook for how to kick off a marketplace business. How many of you guys are entrepreneurs? Okay, so here's my playbook. And I've done this across 3 different companies, so I think it works pretty well. What I like to do is, and this is how I like kick off a marketplace business, my how-to. So first what I do is I come up with a crazy idea. We all do that. Then write that down into slide-based format. I like to use the Guy Kawasaki 10-20-30. If you don't know that, read The Art of the Start. Then I take the pitch deck and I go out into the world and I approach the customers, which are businesses, and I beg, borrow, steal to try and get their time, get in front of them, and I give them the pitch, the great pitch on how I'm going to change their lives, and see how many people laugh at me, make fun of me, all of the fun things that we all go through every day as an entrepreneur. And I note their feedback really carefully. And I like to, when I say note their feedback, I'm looking for, did the person's eyes gloss over on a certain slide? Did they twitch? Did they, every little tell? Because people never want to give you bad news. And VCs don't like giving bad news to entrepreneurs, customers. No one likes to say mean things, right? We all go through life and we're like, man, giving that tough news, it might help that person, but it's also just easier to get through this meeting and get out of here. And this starving entrepreneurs begging me for time. So I capture that feedback and I'm trying to hone my pitch. And by the way, just to talk about back at the, the lab, if you will, writing software, I haven't written a single line of code yet. All I've done is write enough of a crappy prototype of something so that someone who doesn't know what technology looks like will think it's actually real enough to believe me on potentially signing up. And the reason I've done that is I've created this kind of scaffold face piece of software is I don't want to build anything until I know whether or not they want to buy it. And I think this is a pretty tried and true way of figuring this out. And so what I do is, and by the way, if any of you want to ping me afterwards, I'll give you a copy of my little beta agreement. But I don't write an agreement that just is kind of canceled for convenience or try it for free. Don't believe in that. I think this is part of the rigor piece. You have to sell them on, this is the price of the thing. That's part of my pitch. It's one of the 10 slides. We get to the price of the thing, and great news, it's free for you for X time period for being an early customer. A lot of them will say no. I would say almost all of them will say no. And so you have to just keep going and keep digging in and keep trying and iterating on the feedback until you can get people to say yes. And I think the reason a lot of people don't build a business this way is it's very embarrassing. Especially I'll tell you, after I sold my first companies and became a self-made millionaire, the idea of going on my knees door to door, begging people who have small businesses to listen to me for their time, then begging once I'm on my knees inside their office or wherever else for feedback. It's pretty humbling, no matter where you are in life. And so I think a lot of people don't like to do that. But I'd highly recommend it because what I go and do is I'm going to run through that. And I love stats. I love analytics. So I'm going to write down basically and capture every piece of data in this entire funnel process. So how many outreaches, how many, every step of my sales funnel, because I'm trying to construct when I bring in a sales force, what it's going to look like later. And so I'm processing all of this data. I'm getting them hopefully to sign these beta agreements. Once I get 10, I stop. And the 10 is where it's arbitrary. I like 10. It's a round number. You could pick 9 or 12, I suppose. But enough that you have real exposure to the segment you're trying to build for. So to kind of bring this example to Skillz, at Skillz, our plan was to sign, we didn't want to sign anyone over 20 employees in terms of a game studio. And we didn't want to sign anyone who wasn't a full-time professional making their living primarily from selling a game. And so we went out into the world. I'd never built a gaming company before. This is my first gaming company. So I don't know anyone in the industry. I literally just cold contacted on LinkedIn, dug in and just kept going until I got to that number. And you learn a lot along the way. You learn all about the industry. You hopefully end with with 10 crazy CEOs of companies who are also going to help you change the world. Our first customer, this guy, Joe, I'll never forget. He told me why he was signing up. He said, Andrew, I've always believed the future of the world robots would power everything. Certainly, Autotech probably
coming.
believes that. And when robots power everything, how are we going to divide up resources? Video games. That's how. And that's why I'm signing up with you. And I said, awesome, Joe. And Joe actually, crazily enough, of our 10 first customers, Joe was actually the biggest, which is sort of like an interesting thing. But he really believed, and he actually helped us design the software. And I guess what I'd say, kind of looking back, is that through kind of seed, Series A, all of the next steps of building a company up to other fun stages that we can talk about another time, it kind of smooths the road. Like, we didn't build something that people don't want. We built something people definitely wanted. In fact, our bigger problem was making it work for them. And kind of guiding their customer feedback and building a product from it. But that solves sort of your supply side in building a marketplace. And then your other side, luckily in our case, in our market, our businesses bring the consumers to their business. It's kind of an interesting facet of gaming. If you think about something like an eBay, you either need to conquer demand or supply. eBay, I don't know how many people remember early days of eBay when it was called Auction Web. I was a kid once. We all were. There was this craze when I was a teenager. It was Beanie Babies, and actually Beanie Babies is what blew out eBay. Beanie Babies and being one of the first people to sell online airplane tickets. And so if you think about like what we're talking about there, is like you're capitalizing on this incredible level of demand for this item, and it's if you can capture a supply, you almost have an instantly built-in demand curve. And so it's like I think you have to think about either side of the marketplace very carefully and how you're going to have a unique way to access and bring it to your platform. And then if you've done something really unique like that, like captured Beanie Babies when everyone wants a Beanie Baby, well, people are going to find out and just kind of word of mouth it and start buying your Beanie Babies like crazy, and then your eBay. In our case, when we launched these. So each of these developers, they actually integrate our product into their games, and then they actually release it into the App Store, and all of their consumers just automatically register into our product. I don't want to use the word virus, but I do think a lot of people who build great software businesses think of the replication of their product almost like a virus. We all love that expression, right? Like going viral. I'm going to go viral. So I'm going very long-winded on this explanation.
No,
we
it's
only
a good
have 5
one.
minutes left, so let's move to the next question.
Again, I'll be referring to previous speakers today. So transition from SaaS business, where I just go and say, this is a monthly subscription, to a marketplace where you are participating in change of money and you're constantly rebalancing supply and demand. Do you own your users, not the studios, but do you have final touch relations? Do you owe your customers on the gaming side? Do you know who they are? Do you know their credit cards? And that's the first question. And second, if you have final touch with the customers, are you advertising games from different studios you're hosting? Because by the end of the day, you're interested in transaction volume if you're a marketplace, and whether they're playing this game, that game, or the game from competitors, you don't care. All you need transaction volume. So are you participating in kind of cross-selling products of game studios to the pool of customers you own, or you just facilitate transactions and you let them do what they want to do, targeting the end users?
So the answer to both is yes. We are actually the credential for the consumer. People sign into Skillz; they don't sign into the game. One of the things in our particular industry that attracted me to building this idea was that most games don't have a sign-in. They don't have a sign-on. They can't kind of command that presence with the consumer. So being the single sign-on for a network business was possible. Once we had that, and actually we captured the data, and this was very controversial early on, we actually said to each of these studios that is signing up with us, hey, we're going to own the consumer and you're not going to have access to them. And they're like, whoa, why would we agree to that? And we're like, well, we're going to build this huge network, and we're successful people, and we think that it can be very large, and we're going to be able to network the data and aggregate it and do things like stop cheating and fraud in video games better than anyone ever has before, which actually relates back to a meme that I think has been in many of the talks here today, which is about trust and safety in the marketplace. Trust and safety in gaming is a paramount, if you ask us. We actually think fairness is the most important thing we do in the video game industry. So long story short, we were able to get them to agree to, even though they, I think the lucky thing is they already did not capture the credential. And so because of the nature of our industry, we were able to capture the credential and keep it. My favorite businesses, and I think the businesses that really transcend from a SaaS business to being a marketplace business, are transactional businesses where you're capturing almost a toll booth fee for providing some value add. You think about eBay again. I think trust and safety is almost the number one thing it provides over a Craigslist. Certainly at Skillz, when we think about fairness, we think about 6 different technologies that we build and the network effects that they create across our network to improve trust and safety over the rest of the industry. I can run through those if you like.
Yeah, we have a few minutes, and maybe, do you have any questions? Yes, please, because that's a trade-off, whether you run through your tech stack and feature set, or we have people asking questions.
Yeah, well, this will help. Mitigating fraud.
Oh.
How are you doing that within your software?
Sure. So in terms of fraud mitigation, we rely on a very well-known third-party provider as well as proprietary data. So, we ran one of the things I like to do just as an entrepreneur, whenever we run a process on any part of our business, we try to run it in a way where it's replicable and it teaches every future person who works at the company how to follow and understand what we learned. And so like cost benefit analysis, for example, at a small company like ours, when we did this with about 20 people, we ran an analysis of 15 different providers who are the leaders in the industry for fraud prevention. You might come up with, do you want me to name certain ones that you like? Okay, I can name those later. But if you'd like where we arrived on that and who we picked and why, but we picked a certain provider, we partnered in with them. One of the things I try to be really careful about as an entrepreneur is to never build software that other people build better than me. I don't really believe in that. I think it's really risky and it's not really a value add in a macro sense. So kind of if you think about, you name it company. The 2 I would name that we liked best during that CBA, as I remember it, were Count and Threat Matrix. Count and Threat Matrix have different capabilities and reasons for why I'd suggest them for anyone engaging in e-commerce transactions. Everything we built in terms of custom proprietary fraud systems was stuff that they didn't do. And then we looked at how we would be able to transport our system from system to system if we need to switch out Threat Matrix versus Count versus others. But I think the fraud piece alone, I'll tell you about like a little anecdote that's kind of funny. We had this user, I'll call him Mr. Beamer, might not be a him. Mr. Beamer created 24,000 fraudulent accounts in our first month of operations. That was problematic. If you think about, so for those who don't know what we do at a very like simplistic way of thinking about it, we power real prizes, so real money inside of video games. People love hacking video games because they do it in the hacker community to show that they're awesome. People also love hacking banks. They do it because they want money. And when you are money and a video game, you get everyone under the sun. We had actually $1,000 of payment volume in our first month. And so we're just up and just starting to do transactions. And we had, it was over 10% fraudulent transactions. And then we had people like Mr. Beamer creating 24,000 fake accounts. A lot of free time. So, I think the net of that story is, in my opinion, one of the things I see too often happen out here in the Valley is this idea that I'm going to like hyperscale right out of the gates rather than like, hey, why don't we stand up all of the elements of our business, see what happens, learn from that, make sure we have extra resources in case bad things happen like Mr. Beamer. And then we're going to iterate and iterate and iterate and hone and hone and hone until we can actually stop Mr. Beamer. Because the last thing you want to do is go from $1,000 of payment volume, 10% fraud, 24,000 fake accounts to scaling that up to millions of dollars. then you go out of business, and you probably lose your mind.
Yes, please.
It sounds like you power, like you enable like a game company to host these esports tournaments. Have you started dabbling into other of their revenue streams that they would have had before, since you have the user base, like skins for a game or things like that?
So the first two revenue streams that we've stood up are one, transaction fees on entry fees into esports tournaments. That's the business I was referencing when I was saying we're doing about $1,800 a minute in transactions. When we think about other streams like brand advertising, for example, we've started tapping that. It's about 5% of our overall revenue mix right now. It's small for us. To kind of give you an idea of size, our payment volume on our system, we're crossing $1 billion right now. So it's pretty sizable and hard for like the brand dollars to catch up to that. We're looking a lot at other downstream activities. So physical events. We had 600,000 people in California play in the last couple of months. Definitely would be great to advertise to those Californians about a headline event somewhere nearby. I'm actively staffing every role you can think of. If you want to recommend any people, please do. We're a 200-person company with 100 open roles, including a head of events, because we want to run, I'd say, more and more physical events to tie into our virtual event system. From a virtual event standpoint, we run about 4 million tournaments every day. So it's like a very crazy thing. And those range from like 2 people competing up to 70,000 people competing. Actually, we just finished a 70,000 person, $250,000 prize pool competition last week. Ended like Saturday.
Are you getting paired up with that gaming site in Las Vegas? Did they build like a center?
You mean the one at the Luxor?
Yeah, I think that,
Yeah. We've when you think about Skillz and our mission, it's really to make esports accessible to everyone, everywhere. So our original tagline has been esports for everyone, and that meant esports for small, medium, and large developers, not just the largest developers as a business. And it meant esports being accessible to amateur, semi-pro, and pro players. So we haven't like really tied into the traditional computer scene. We do all mobile and tablet. So mobile and tablet gaming, to kind of give you the contextual size, computers worldwide deployed right now, about 700 million computers. There are 4 billion mobile and tablet devices. In terms of actives per month, there are 2.6 billion monthly actives on mobile gaming versus computer, you're looking at about 40%. So the mobile gaming scene is like 10 times the size of the computer scene. Some countries like China, for example, mobile gaming and esports are actually now the primary activity as opposed to computer. And I see our time is up.
Thank you. Thank you, Drew. Super helpful.